declarative memory. This is our memory for things that we can state out loud, that we can put into words. And it takes two different forms as well. We have what's called semantic memory, which is our long-term memory for facts and information that we have stored in our head that's not tied to anything really personal or anything like this. You know, the times tables you learned as a child, your phone number of your childhood home, the fact that you might remember that Columbus sailed to North America in 1492. Those are facts and bits of information that we have stored in our brain. We don't necessarily remember where or when we learned it, but we have it in there. We can call it up at any time. Now that's in opposition to episodic or autobiographical memory. These are our very personal time-stamped memories. You know, these are, you know, remembering a big 25th birthday or something, remembering your wedding day, remembering a big trip you took a few years ago. Things that are personally tied to you, to a time and a place and all that sort of thing, that are not just facts and numbers, and that's our episodic memory. And related to that is something that's called remote memory. And this is it's debatable whether you'd call this a completely separate memory, but one of the things about remote memory is this is our ability to recall information from many, many, many years ago. Things from, as I say, childhood, things, you know, when you remember a big trip you took with your parents when you were a little boy or a little girl, things like that. If you're, you know, middle-aged or older adult, you might remember your wedding day from 30 or 40 years ago. That's remote memory, very, very distant. And you don't always think about it, and sometimes the details get lost, but other times there's really a lot of detail and a lot of specific information that can be pulled up with even just a couple small reminders. And the last type of memory I'm going to mention here is a little bit unusual. It's called prospective memory. This is a bit different from all the other types because all the things I've been talking about for now, immediate, recent, long-term, episodic, all that refers to memory for something that's happened to us in the past, something that we learned, that we stored, and we recalled it later on. Prospective memory is our memory for a future event. It's remembering to do something in the future. So remembering after this phone call, after this webinar, to go and switch the laundry around. Remembering to pick up milk on the way home. Remembering to call your sister on the weekend because you have to make arrangements for a trip or something like that. It's still a kind of memory because you think about it, you put it in your storage bank, and you want to pull it out again later on. But it's not for something that's happened. It's you're remembering, you're reminding yourself to do something in the future. So it's still a kind of memory, but it's different from all those other ones in that way. Now, as I said, all these different kinds of memory can involve different parts of the brain to a certain degree. Most of them involve many parts of the brain working together and in some communication. And for the most part, all of our long-term memory, that remote memory, that procedural memory, episodic, all those long-term memories, they tend to be fairly well distributed throughout the brain. All different parts of our brain are involved in storing that information and bringing it up, which really means that, you know, damage to one tiny little part of the brain doesn't mean you're going to lose one particular memory. Rather, it's distributed out there. However, there are certain structures that are more important than others, and one of the ones I'm going to focus on here for just a few minutes is an area called the hippocampus. It's a really crucial brain structure that's important for that recent memory, and therefore it's really important for forming new memories. As I said before, to get information into our long-term storage has to go from immediate memory into recent or short-term memory, and then it eventually gets into long-term memory. So the hippocampus, we know, is a very important structure for forming recent memories and making new memories. Now, just for a brief minute or two here, I'm going to dive into some basic brain neuroanatomy here. I promise it's not going to be long, and I'm not going to get into too much gory detail. But here is a drawing of a brain, and this is the left-hand side of a brain. And I'm going to put a pointer in here if I can. I'm not sure if it's going to work here. There we go. So if you look at the brain here overall, this is what we call, this would be the front part of the brain over here. This is the back of the head over here. This little wrinkly part under here is called the cerebellum. That has a lot to do with our coordination and all that sort of thing. And this part right in here is called the temporal lobe. It's the area of our brain that is right beside the temple. We have one on each side, the left and the right side. And deep inside of this, if you sort of unfolded this thing and looked inside, you'd see this little area called the hippocampus. And as I said, that's an important part of the brain for forming new memories and being able to keep information in there for a short period of time. So that's most of the brain anatomy I'm going to be talking about tonight. I will be mentioning it again later on, but it's not going to get any more complicated than that. So I've talked about different kinds of memory. What I'd like to talk about next is different factors that can affect memory functioning in people. And I've listed several of them here. This is not necessarily everything that can affect memory, but these are some of the major players that can affect people's ability to learn, store, and recall information. I'm going to go through them one at a time here. And they can have both negative and positive effects on our memory, depending on what's going on. So the first one I'll talk about is age. Unfortunately, the natural course of things is that as we get older, our memory does not work quite as well as it used to when we were younger. And I include myself in that mix. Don't worry, I'm not going to be any kind of saying, oh, yeah, well, my memory is perfect, but I don't know about you guys. No, pretty much around, middle age or so, you'll start to see slight minor declines in recent memory. It's perfectly natural. It's perfectly normal. Just like most of us, we can't necessarily run up a flight of stairs like we did when we were 20. We can't necessarily remember quite as easily or as well information when we get into our 40s, 50s, and 60s. The good thing is that it is a very mild effect. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong, and these kind of changes in memory are often pretty easy to work around, and most people do it quite naturally using some of the techniques that I'm going to be talking about later on. But just so we know, unfortunately, we hit our peak pretty much in our 20s, and after that we see a very, very slight gradual decline in memory, which is perfectly fine and normal. Happens to us all. Another factor that can affect memory is, of course, different medical conditions or anything that might injure the brain or prevent it from functioning normally. And I've listed several of them here. Again, this is not the list of every single thing, but all of these events can sometimes have an effect on memory. Of course, there's epilepsy, but people that have had a stroke can sometimes have problems with their memory. People who have an injury to their head that damages a part of the brain might or might not have problems with their memory. Dementia is a catch-all phrase which refers to things like Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, Pick's disease, people that certain types of Parkinson's disease can result in dementia. This, by definition, means memory problem. And when this occurs in the context of an illness, it's an abnormal thing. I said that memory declines with age. That's normal. The kind of memory changes you see in an Alzheimer's or Pick's disease or certain types of Parkinson's, that is an abnormal memory problem. Thyroid problems, anything really that messes up someone's metabolism and their some certain hormone levels, people that have an overactive or underactive thyroid can have problems with their memory. And then finally, people that are having significant mood issues, whether they're having notable depression, whether they're having significant anxiety, both of those can also affect your memory. Now, the big thing, of course, I want to point out is that this is not a guarantee. Other than that, dementia, which is specifically a memory problem, you don't always see memory changed or being affected by these things. So, of course, I'm not going to talk about all those. I'm going to talk primarily tonight about epilepsy. And when people have epilepsy, memory problems and concerns are often reported. There was one large study in the United States that suggested it's probably the second most reported concern of epilepsy patients is worrying about their memory. In that study, the number one was driving, but memory was really high up there as a concern, along with things like unexpected seizures and effects of medication and all that. And when people have problems with their memory, related to epilepsy, it can take place in different ways. It can show up in different forms. Again, remember I talked about all these different types of memory. People that have epilepsy don't always have a memory problem, but when they do, it might affect some types of memory more than others. Primarily, though, when you're having problems with epilepsy, the biggest changes you're going to see are going to be in immediate memory, that recent and short-term memory, and often in that prospective memory. It is now, as I said before, problems in short-term memory and that sort of thing can then interfere with our ability to form long-term memories. But when people have a problem with their memory with epilepsy, typically it doesn't affect old past memories too much. It can sometimes, but that's less common. Most commonly, it's the forming of new memories. It's our recent new memories that we have the most trouble with. So there's many things that can cause memory problems in people that have epilepsy when it occurs. One thing, of course, is just people having a seizure. When people have a seizure, it can interfere with the formation of memories. When people have a seizure, if they lose their awareness, they lose touch of their surroundings, or they actually, black out for a few seconds or minutes, they're going to not be able to remember that information, of course. Sometimes people won't completely lose touch or be unconscious, but they might just have some problems with their attention for a little bit, and that makes memory hard to function as well. Another way that memory can be affected is when seizures directly interfere with that part of the brain I mentioned before, the hippocampus. That's a very common place in the brain for seizures to come from, and when the seizures occur and interfere with its normal functioning, it can result in some impairment of the memory being able to be formed in a regular way. Now, the other thing is that epilepsy can also sometimes interfere with memory because in some people, there's unusual activity in the brain even when they're not having a seizure. Sometimes parts of the brain are firing in an erratic way or not in the way that they should when they're not having a seizure, just as part of their epilepsy condition. And when that's happening frequently or to a great degree, sometimes that's going to interfere with people's memory functioning, their ability to form new information, and that sort of thing. And finally, there's also sometimes scarring or damage that occurs in parts of the brain where seizures are coming from. We tend to find that people that have damage in the physical part of the hippocampus more often will have difficulties with their memory. Not always. Sometimes other parts of the brain can compensate and take over. Sometimes the areas that's not scarred nearby there are doing all the work for them. But that is sometimes associated with memory problems in people that have epilepsy. Now, where the scarring or damage comes from is another story altogether. Sometimes it'll come from an infection or an injury to the brain, and then epilepsy starts, but the jury is still out on whether or not this scarring comes from epilepsy or the scarring comes there and the epilepsy comes after that. That's still not really known at all. So other factors that can affect memory in epilepsy are treatment. One of the biggest ones, of course, is people that have surgery. Now, people that have epilepsy, sometimes they will have their seizures well controlled with medication, but there's a certain proportion of people that can't be helped through medicine. For those people, sometimes they can be helped with surgery. The doctors will do a large number of extensive studies. They'll determine that all the seizures are coming from one particular part of the brain, and based on all the investigations that we do, we can make a judgment about whether it seems to be a low risk or relatively safe procedure to remove that epilepsy-causing part of the brain and get the seizures under better control. In that case, sometimes that surgery results in a change in memory. It doesn't happen in everyone. If you take all the epilepsy patients across all the different types of epilepsy they have and all the kinds of different surgery they have, overall there might be changes in between 10 and 60% of epilepsy patients. But that's just lumping everybody in together in one group. A lot of different factors are involved in whether or not the memory will change, including how the memory was functioning before the surgery, where the surgery is taking place. If the surgery is going to be taking place outside of that temporal lobe of the hippocampus, it's very unlikely that there's going to be much of a memory change. But if they are going to be doing surgery in the temporal lobe and into the hippocampus, then there's sometimes a greater risk that there's going to be a change or worsening of memory. But again, not always. And it depends on which side of the brain it is, how much surgery they do, all these kinds of factors come into play. And I just want to emphasize that this is not a guarantee. Even if we say that somebody has a very high likelihood of memory change, there's no 100% that they will absolutely have it. Some people do not notice any change in their memory after surgery. Now, when it does happen, what's important to realize is the kind of memory changes that people have. They do not have Hollywood amnesia. When we say, oh, there's a chance your memory will change or you'll have a worsening of your memory after surgery, it's a change in memory's efficiency. The ability to form and create new memories becomes worse, not gone. And it doesn't get rid of your ability to, remember who you are or where you live or anything from your past. No. If there's going to be a change following surgery, it means that people become more forgetful in day-to-day life. They tend to forget conversations more easily. They forget about appointments. They misplace things more often. Regular kind of memory problems tend to happen more often. And for some people, the changes in memory might be quite subtle. They might be quite small. They might not notice them in their everyday activities. Some people do, but some people don't. It really depends on a lot of different factors. So another aspect, I mentioned that some people's epilepsy can be controlled through medication. Well, certain medications have been shown to affect people's memory as well. More commonly, when people with epilepsy have memory side effects from their medicine, it tends to be seen more in the older anti-seizure medications. Phenobarbital is a fairly notorious one. Some people have found that with high doses of a drug called Tegretol, they might have some more memory problems. But a lot of the newer, more modern epilepsy drugs, and even by newer in the last 10 or 15 years, they tend to have a lot fewer side effects and maybe no noticeable changes in memory functioning. The one exception to that is a drug called topiramate or Topamax, which it does not affect everyone this way. It can be a very good drug for controlling seizures, but in a proportion of people that take the drug, as the amount increases, they tend to report more difficulties with attention and concentration. They have trouble finding words more easily. They have that tip of the tongue experience a lot more often. And that can sometimes, the attention and concentration can sometimes affect their memory. The nice thing about when medications might affect memory is that often it's related to the amount. And so doctors can sometimes just change how much of the medicine someone is taking, and they'll still benefit from the seizure control effects but not have the memory problems. Or if they take the drug away and replace it with another one, those memory difficulties, thinking difficulties tend to go away as well. It's reversible. And I also have on here that there are certain antidepressants and some anti-anxiety medication that sometimes is related to memory problems. Not too many of the modern ones, though. It's, again, usually more older drugs that we tend to see those problems. So I've talked a lot about how things can negatively affect your memory. I'd like to talk now a little bit about some other aspects that can sometimes help memory functioning. One of them is diet and exercise. In general, we find that people that take better care of themselves, have better nutrition, tend to have better functioning. In general, we find that people that have good vitamin and mineral intake, that have lower fat and cholesterol in their diet, tend to have better thinking abilities, better memory abilities, and this carries on through life as well. It's the same thing that our mothers and grandmothers have been telling us for many years, and we should eat our fruits and vegetables, and that's the best way for us to get vitamins and minerals into our body. Taking vitamins is good, but getting them from the source, it's easier for body to process. Whatever it takes, though, getting the proper amount of vitamins and minerals in our body, having a relatively healthy diet is associated with better memory functioning in general. There's also an effect that we see in people that get a certain amount of exercise. What studies have found is that if people do some light to moderate exercise, walk quickly on a treadmill or get involved in something that just gets the heart rate up a little bit, they actually perform better on memory tests right after they do the exercise. It's not a permanent effect. It just sort of gets the juices flowing and works better. In the long term, it's much like with a healthy diet. People that maintain some relatively regular exercise routine, that just get up and move around on at least a semi-regular basis, tend to have better functioning in their thinking in general and in their memory as well. I'm not saying that everybody has to go out and run marathons to have good memory. I'm just saying that if you don't do anything at all, that's not good for your body. It's not as good for your brain. But getting out, getting some movement, even walking around once in a while, taking the dog for a walk, all that kind of stuff can help memory at least a little bit. Another factor that can affect memory is stress. Now, stress can be positive or negative. It's not, most people, when they think about stress, they think about being stressed out about their job or being stressed out about paying bills and all that sort of thing, and that is very stressful. But you can also have positive stress. Planning a friend's birthday party or planning a wedding can be a very exciting time, but it still causes stress. Regardless of the source, high levels of stress cause a chemical in our body to be secreted called cortisol. And it's a hormone that affects the functioning of many different things. And a small amount for a brief period of time can actually be helpful. If you've got to get something done and you need to get energized a little bit of energy, a little bit of nervousness can help motivate us and get us going. But high levels of stress for a prolonged time, resulting in high levels of a long time of cortisol, can worsen memory because it actually has an effect on the hippocampus. It kind of interferes with its normal functioning, makes it not work very well. Luckily, these effects tend to be reversible. If the stress goes away, the cortisol goes down, the brain tends to recover, and we go back to our regular functioning again. So people that are under a high level of stress constantly can have ongoing frequent memory problems. But if somehow that stress can get under control, or people can cope with it a little bit better, they often will see some improvement in their thinking and memory as well. So another factor that can improve memory is just relaxation, getting that stress under control. Now, basically, setting aside some time in your life to do things you enjoy, go to places that make you feel good. Anything that helps alleviate stress can help improve memory if your memory problems are being caused by stress. There's other formal techniques that people sometimes do. They might do deep breathing, they might do meditation, there might be formal things like Tai Chi or yoga. Now, you have to be careful with this if someone has epilepsy, though, because abnormal breathing or anything that's unusual from the routine, you should always check with your doctor. But basically, things that relax you, things that let you calm down, things that make you feel better can alleviate stress and therefore have some improvement in general thinking, including memory. Now, a lot of times people also will ask me about, what about getting my brain going, brain activating activities? Using your brain, keeping it active, can help to a certain degree. A lot of times people will ask me, well, is my memory kind of like a mental muscle? Can I exercise it? If I practice my memory, if I do a whole bunch of my memory, will it improve and get better? Well, the answer, unfortunately, is yes and no. On the one hand, yes, because if you never engage your brain and you just sort of let it sit around and not do anything, and you don't really bother trying to pay attention to things or keep yourself active, then yeah, you can have a decline in thinking and memory. But practicing memory tricks, practicing memory techniques, practicing any kind of thinking ability doesn't necessarily improve your memory itself. What we find is when people are practicing a technique over and over again, you get really good at that one thing, but it doesn't spread across to other abilities like with regular exercise. If you're practicing, lifting weights, you'll be able to lift all kinds of things. But if you want to practice memorizing things, that just makes you really good at memorizing that one thing. It doesn't make your memory improve in general. I often use the example of Sudoku. People can do Sudoku puzzles over and over and over again. You'll get really good at Sudoku puzzles, but you're not going to become a math genius. Same sort of thing with thinking abilities. If there's something you want to learn, practice that. But unfortunately, it doesn't spread as well as we'd like. The most important thing, of course, is just to do things that you enjoy. Stimulate your thinking regularly, whether it be through reading, watching television, that educational shows, traveling, socializing, anything that engages your brain is good. Doing puzzles and games, all that kind of stuff. But the important thing, of course, is to do things that you enjoy. If you're doing something because you think it's good for you, but you really hate it, it's not going to be good. People often used to ask me, I've heard doing crossword puzzles is good for my brain. Should I be doing crossword puzzles? Well, if you like crossword puzzles, yes. Personally, I'm very bad at crossword puzzles. It makes me feel stupid, and therefore I get stressed out about it. And as I said before, that's going to impair my memory. So when I talk about doing these brain activating activities, do something that you like, and then that will help. So what I'm going to talk about for the last little bit here are some different strategies for memory, working around memory difficulties when they arise. And the one thing I want to emphasize is that I just said before, practicing memory doesn't help. These are compensation techniques. These are workaround strategies for if you're having a memory problem. They're ways to allow you to function as if your memory is working better, even if it doesn't change your memory specifically. For example, I wear eyeglasses. I don't have very good eyes. My vision is not great. When I put on my glasses, I can see as if I have good vision. My eyes haven't changed, but I'm functioning as if they're working better than normal. So that's the thing with these memory techniques that I'm going to talk about here. Your memory itself may not change, but your day-to-day functioning will be better, and they can help you avoid memory mistakes by having these tools you can pull out as you need it. They're useful for everyday memory mistakes that everybody makes, so everyone can benefit from these. And different techniques will work differently for different people. It's important that you use what works best for you. I'm going to talk about a few different techniques. All of them can be helpful to different degrees, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone should try to do them all. Pick and choose the ones that you like, try some out, stick with the ones that work best for you. So I'm going to be talking about essentially 5 different kinds of memory strategies, one at a time. First one, I'll be talking with Soria, I'll just say focusing your attention, adding meaning to things, using repetition in a different way than we might be used to, organizing things, and the classic, write it down. So focusing your attention. When you want to learn information, you know it's going to be something important, focus on that information that you want to learn. Be choosy. You don't necessarily want to memorize every single thing in your life. It would be nice, but if you're going to have to put this effort out, be picky about what you want to pay attention to. When you need to focus on something, try to reduce distractions. If you're having an important phone call, have the other people in the room be quiet. Turn off the television, that sort of thing. Go into a quiet room. If you have to fill out some complicated forms or you're working on your taxes, again, turn off distracting sounds. Clear space on the table so you're not being distracted by things. Try not to multitask so much. Do one thing at a time. We may feel like we're getting more done if we try to do a whole bunch of tasks at once, but dividing our attention means that we can't give it fully to any one thing. And in some cases, trying to do several things at once ends up taking longer than if we'd just done them one at a time and focused on that one thing each time. Another thing to do is to emphasize the key information that you are going to want to remember later on. You can do that by, say, picturing yourself doing an activity. If you find that you're always worrying that you can't remember if you turned off the stove before you left the house, or you can't remember if you locked the door, really think about what you're going to do. Or if you want to remember to do something in the future, picture yourself doing it. Pay attention to yourself turning off the oven. If you want to remember to pick up stamps, then picture yourself going to the store, going to the post office, getting the stamps. Picture yourself stopping and getting milk, going to the counter, taking it to the register, all that sort of thing. Say what you're going to do out loud or what you're trying to remember. I said before, if you're having trouble remembering if you turn the stove or if you lock the door, say it out loud to yourself. I've locked the door. I've turned off the stove. I put the food in the fridge. Whatever it is, say it out loud. You don't have to yell it, but say it out loud enough so that you can hear it. That's a form of repeating it, and it makes your brain think about it in a different way. Another thing you can do to try and help you remember information is to add some sort of meaning to it. Put it into a context. Think about what it means to you. Okay, I really want to remember this, and it's important because this is what the doctor told me, and it's related to my epilepsy. Add some sort of meaning to it. It actually is helpful to add some unusual meaning, though, so it really sticks out. picture a visual image, some sort of thing that is going to make you think about it and concentrate on it. Often, the more unusual or odd the image you think of, the better it is. This is particularly good if you're trying to remember names and that sort of thing. For instance, my name is kind of long and complicated, Hayman-Abello. Well, if you really wanted to remember this for the future, you could say, imagine a guy standing on a pile of hay and hollering out my name, Hayman-Abello. He's bellowing out the name. I mean, that's kind of a silly one, but as I say, the odder the better. And just going through that and really picturing that can help you remember it for later on. Another thing to do is to use rhymes and different sayings. I mean, a lot of us, I mentioned earlier how we have information like Columbus sailed to North America in 1492. Hopefully I'm not the only one old enough to still do this, but a long time ago we used to have the rhyme, in the year 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It's an odd little rhyme. It's not very helpful for anything except remembering that date, but I still have it in there, and it sticks with me. Another thing that might show my age is way back in the day on CBC radio, there used to be some shows, and when people still used paper mail a lot more often, they would invite you to send them letters and information. And this one announcer, Arthur Black, used to say the postal code, but he would never say the actual postal code. He'd use a little rhyme. It was M5W1E6. But he wouldn't say that. He'd say, make 5 wieners, I'll eat 6. And so that's how he would help people remember the information, and that was much more helpful. It really sticks in with you that way. Something that we often do, too, is look for patterns, what's called chunking. If someone tells you to remember a phone number or an address, a long series of numbers can be hard to remember, but putting it into chunks means there's fewer things to recall. So, for instance, when we're trying to remember the phone number when you're calling here today, it was 764-8662. That's 7 numbers, and if you put the area code in there, 416. Well, 416 is easy, but do 764-8662. Faster, easier. Don't have to remember as many numbers that way. Still the same amount of information, but it feels like it's less. I mean, you have to remember some address like 17325, 17325. Fewer numbers that way, even though it's the same amount of information. Another thing you can do is to repeat information. Now, this is something that, we've been doing all the time where we want to memorize something, repeat it, study it, go over it over and over and over again. But there's a better way to do this that is a little more helpful. It's called spaced repetition, or spread out the repetition. Instead of just going over something over and over and over again, do it in little bits and spurts, but spread it out after a while. Repeat information at gradually increasing intervals. Remember it, say it to yourself, say it again, then don't say it again for 5 seconds, then test yourself. Then don't say it again for 30 seconds, then test yourself. Then do something else, keep yourself busy, try to remember it again in 5 minutes. If you can remember that information after 15 or 30-minute breaks, it's probably going to be staying in there for good. If you do forget, then shorten it up again, go back. Now, this is not something you want to do for everything in your life, but if it's very important information, you want to try to memorize it in your head, you can use this form of repetition. And it's a little more work, it's a little more effort, and so that's why I say it's not good for everything. But if it's important, it's something you want to learn, especially if you're trying to learn new information about medicine, or if you're starting a new job or something where you won't be able to look at notes all the time, this is going to be a helpful way to do it potentially. Another technique is to get organized. Put things in their place. You find you're constantly misplacing your keys, your wallet, your glasses. Give them a set logical place where they are. If they're not in your hand or on your head, then they should be in some spot. Now, use logical locations. Keys on a hook by the door, or in a bowl in the kitchen or something. Your glasses on the counter, your wallet in your jacket, or on your desk or something like that. The important thing here is that you don't want to do this for everything. Just pick and choose a couple things that you're tending to misplace. Important things. You don't want to have every single thing in your house have its own special spot, and if it's moved, you get all upset. No, that causes a whole other set of problems beyond memory that you don't want to have. Pick and choose the things you're having trouble remembering. Another thing with organization is to organize lists by categories. If you're going to go shopping for groceries, reorganize it. Put all the meat items together, all the milk items together, all the bread items together in separate sections. You might have to recopy your list to do this, but that's going to really help you to remember the information. And then if you go to the store and you did happen to forget it, your list at home, you're probably going to actually remember a lot of those things. If you have a list of things you want to do in the day, organize it by, say, the order you have to do them and how important they are or something like that, or where they are in the city. Essentially, trying to organize things helps your memory work better and get it in there. Now, I know we're getting close to the end here, and I want to leave time for questions, so I'm just going to pop through these last few things fairly quickly. Last thing I'm going to talk about is written reminders, writing things down. After just repeating it to ourselves, this is probably the most commonly used memory strategy. Want to remember something? Write it down. Post-it notes are a really great little thing. Write it down on a note, have a piece of paper with you, but it's only really good if you have it with you. It's all fine and good to write a note beside the phone to do something or to call somebody and then leave it at home when you're out. Carrying a little notepad is good. Having some organized planner of some sort is better. And you can get paper ones from all kinds of stores, Staples and Target and all that sort of thing, or you can get fancy and get an electronic organizer or smartphone, something like that. Now, with these written reminders, a planner, organizer, or smartphone, they're nice because the organization is built in. You have a calendar. You'll have a section to put things like your doctor's name and address, or your children or best friend's phone number, that sort of thing. You can have a section that's just your to-do list. Have a little scratch pad or area for temporary information that you want to have something on there. You and your family member or friend are going to the mall or going to the doctor's appointment, and you park in the parkade and you know you're in 4C or yellow 2 or something. That's really important information for the next couple of hours, but it's not something you need for the rest of your life. So carry some little post-it notes with you there in your organizer, or use your electronic one. Now, the thing about having an organizer like this, it's important to think small. As I said before, you need to have something that you'll have with you can check all the time, something that's going to fit in a pocket or a purse or something like that. And determine, just like I said before, set places for it so you don't lose this. If it's not in your hand, it's in this pocket or it's in this bag. And if it's at home, it's in this part of your house. And you really need to get in the habit of checking this at regular times. It's all fine and good to write things down if you ever forget to look at your reminders. But if you get in the habit of looking at it at least a couple, 3 times a day for your calendar and your to-do list, often I recommend checking it whenever you sit down to eat. That gets you in the habit of saying, okay, have I done what I need to do? What do I have to do next? What do I have to plan for getting ready to do the next day and things like that. Now, I talked about having, a paper organizer versus an electronic organizer. There's pros and cons to each of them. The nice thing about a paper organizer is it's pretty easy to learn. It's a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. Most people can just write things down. If you're not used to using an electronic organizer or a smartphone, that can be a challenge. It can be difficult to learn. That's becoming a lot less of a problem now. Most everybody uses smartphones or knows how they work, and of course, modern phones, iPhones and Galaxy, Android phones and all those things are made to be much, much more user-friendly than they were even just a few years ago. So that's becoming less an issue. Price can sometimes be an issue. Paper is obviously pretty inexpensive. You can get things for just a few dollars sometimes if you want something really basic. But electronic devices can be very expensive. Again, becoming less of an issue as different companies like to give you programs and deals and all that, but still, if money's tight and you don't already have that kind of a device, it might be a lot to lay out all at once. It's nice to have a paper organizer because if you drop it, no problem. Unless you drop it in a giant mud puddle or in a puddle of paint, it's probably going to be okay. Whereas iPhones and electronic devices, sometimes if they fall, they break and it's expensive to replace. Whereas a paper one, pretty easy, go and grab a new one anytime. Now, I don't want to make it sound like I'm all against electronic organizers. I think they're actually great. One of the, of course, negatives of the paper organizers is that they do fill up. If you have a calendar with all the predates in it, you have to get a new one every year. And if you want to add more information to the telephone section in there, it's going to fill up eventually. But on electronic organizers, for things like your calendar and your to-do list and things like that, your appointment contact information, that's essentially unlimited. I mean, you'll fill it up with music and applications maybe, but for that basic stuff, it's never going to really be filled up. And as I said, you need to replace your paper one pretty much every year, but the electronic one, you can use the same one for years and years if you want, although a lot of us will end up upgrading. And there's a whole lot of different extra features, of course, in electronic devices. They're going to have alarms and reminders to help you remember to do things, to go to appointments, take medicine. It'll have a phone, all kinds of stuff. So what I want to just finish off with is I've talked a lot about different memory strategies. I've talked about how there are compensation techniques for everyday memory mistakes. As I said, not every technique is going to be equally good for every person. It's important to use what works best for you, to try different things, and find out what's going to be most beneficial for you. Try it out, see what works for you, and hopefully your everyday memory mistakes will be at least helped if we can't get rid of them entirely. Thanks for your time and listening. Sorry that I went a little fast there at the end. I just was watching the time. I'd like to be able to try and answer some questions now if I can.
Great. So you had a couple of questions come to you before the session. Do you want to address those then at this point?
Sure, no problem. So a couple of questions came in from email. I'm just going to read them out loud ahead here. One was, oh, sorry, I have to get the other one up here. One was talking about having some difficulties with memory with their epilepsy and taking certain medication, Keppra. I forget about events, people, dates, things that happened yesterday, and it interfered with work, feeling very depressed. Is that normal? Decline in memory related to epilepsy or related to medication is not necessarily normal. It can happen, but it's something that should probably definitely be looked at. This question, is it normal to have these kinds of problems? It might be normal for the kind of condition that you have. As I said before, certain kinds of epilepsy can interfere with memory. I haven't read a lot of information on Keppra specifically affecting memory. Now, I have to say, of course, that I'm not a physician, so I can't speak to changing or stopping or adding new medications. But I do know research on memory and Keppra, there hasn't been a whole lot consistently associated with that. But that doesn't mean that it's not a possible side effect. And anytime you have unusual things after you start a medication, always talk to your doctor. When people are feeling very sad and depressed, though, definitely you can have difficulties with memory. And it's important in those cases to have an effort made to talk to your doctor and try to see if maybe you need some treatment for the sad or depressed mood as well. If you're having depressed mood, that can interfere with thinking, that can interfere with memory, that can interfere with ability to form new information. So definitely talk to your doctor about that. Another question that came in was about could I have amnesia as it appears I have all the symptoms? I'm not entirely sure about that. Amnesia specifically means poor memory, and you can have it from a lot of different causes. Inability to form any new memories, severe amnesia, that's a little bit more unusual. Definitely, talk to your doctor if you're having that sort of thing. But often people will have memory that's more for recent information or more variable as opposed to a complete inability to remember things. But if people are having severe memory problems, again, it's important to mention it to your doctor, and they can make a referral for formal assessment of memory. That's what I do here at University Hospital, but also many, many neuropsychologists outside of epilepsy test people's thinking abilities. And it's important to see if people are experiencing memory problems because of memory impairment specifically, or maybe other factors are interfering with memory. Maybe it's depression, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's medication, maybe it's some other condition that interferes with normal memory functioning. Whenever you're in doubt, I would check it out.
a great suggestion. Thank you. We have a couple of questions here in the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is memory affected more or less due to the type or number of seizures a person has? Or is it more of an individual thing depending on the person?
That's a good question, and the answer is yes to both of those things. It can be affected more depending on the kind or number of seizures a person has. If someone is having seizures coming from the temporal lobes, temporal lobe epilepsy, that can be more commonly affecting memory. If they're having seizures that cause a movement of their body or a twitch or something, but they never are losing consciousness or unaware, that might not affect memory too much. But if there's a lot of blacking out and a lot of losing touch with surroundings for seconds or minutes at a time, that could be affecting memory. But unfortunately, yeah, it does depend on the person. Sometimes you'll see that people that have had epilepsy for a long, long time, since early childhood, they might have more trouble with memory as they're an adult than people who only develop epilepsy later in life. But it depends as well. Some people will have a change in their memory after the epilepsy starts, depending on the kind they have and if it's all coming from an area near or around the temporal lobe. So I'm sorry to be wishy-washy, but you asked a tough question that basically is, yes, it can vary.
That makes sense. So there's another one here, and hopefully you can read it on your screen. It's about the mom who's asked about Gibbons syndrome.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not as familiar with that syndrome. It's something, again, definitely to talk to your doctor about. I mean, if she's had it for a long period of time, then it can possibly be affected by that. It's when people have the absent version of that, there might be more often effect of memory on there. When there's just the effects on the eye, fluctuation and that sort of thing, maybe not, but if there, as you say, hundreds of small seizures a day, it's possible because it might be interfering with her ability to focus and concentrate throughout the day. I don't know that the medication would necessarily have something specifically to do with that, but certainly if there are hundreds of small seizures a day and interfering with her ability to focus and concentrate like that, it's possible. I wouldn't be surprised if that's interfering with someone's ability to form new memories. If you haven't already, it might be helpful to see if the doctor can arrange for some testing of that. It depends, though. I mean, the testing might have to take place over several days or a couple of days or so, because if she's, having several seizures, hundreds of seizures a day, it might be difficult to do the testing, but it'd be worth trying, I think.
And would that be through a neuropsychologist as well? Is that what she'd ask for a referral to, or?
Possibly, yes. Probably a neuropsychologist, asking the neurologist to just say, could we have her memory tested? Could we have her thinking tested? Then yeah, most likely it would be through a neuropsychologist, because neuropsychology specializes in looking at all different aspects of thinking. So memory would be tested along with a lot of other things, if it can be tested even. It depends, depending on how old she is and that sort of thing. Sometimes the testing is more helpful when they're a little bit older. But I mean, a little bit older, I mean older than age 2 or 3 sort of thing.
Right. Okay, well, I think that we've answered all the questions that have come through. Certainly you can see by the conversation on the side in the chat box that this is certainly a topic that a lot of people can relate to. So I'm very appreciative of you taking the time to share with us this evening. Memory is just so complicated and something that many of us take for granted, and when we don't have it, it just creates such great frustration and can even wreak havoc on our lives. So thank you so much for helping us think about different strategies to cope with this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I just want to ask add one last thing in here. I do want to make sure I acknowledge two of my great mentors, Dr. Angela Troyer and Dr. Kelly Murphy at the Baycrest Center. As you were saying at the beginning, I did some training there in my postdoctoral years on these memory strategies and techniques. That's where a lot of our work was, and I want to definitely make sure I mention them because I owe a great debt of thanks for filling my head with all the knowledge of these techniques. I've tried to add to it and build on it from there, but they really were a huge basis in being able to pass information on to you guys.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. Well, I know I certainly have learned a lot, and clearly from the comments on the side, others have really appreciated it. So on behalf of Epilepsy Ontario and all our attendees tonight, Dr. Hayman-Abello, I want to thank you very much for giving of your evening and sharing of your expertise. As Dr. Hayman-Abello has mentioned, we would remind everybody that they should contact their physician about any specific medical information, or you can contact your local epilepsy agency for information and support, and you can find them by visiting our website at epilepsyontario.org. So we have recorded this session, and we'll post it up on our website in a couple of days, and I'll send a notice to everyone who has registered that it is posted, as well as a copy of the slides. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Hayman-Abello, and I wish everyone a good evening. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.